go, resuming the recording. So again, congratulations to those states. Very excited to have them on board with the SIG network. Some of them are new, some of them are returning states. So excited to have that piece. So our agenda today, we're going to review the SIG Network National Meeting resources, guide you to where you can find those pieces on the website. Then after that, like I said, we've got presenters from the Indiana SPDIG, and really a thank you for them to step up. That'll be them sharing their dissemination plan, as well as lessons learned through 15 years of SPDIG funding. So really excited about that piece. Before we jump into that, I do want to share the website and where you'll find the national meetings. Before I go into that, I want to highlight the resource library. So as I said, the SIG network has two major focuses or foci. One is to connect people. The other is to make sure that resources that are being developed across the SPDIGs are available to be shared, available to be adapted, whatever it might be. And so this resource library is an important part of the website. It's changed over the years, but the way we've got it now is that you can filter by resource topic, year, or of course you can search titles if you know the title. But under resource topic, you can select any of the topics. For example, if I click on coaching, many of the topics have subtopics that you can click on. So I'm going to go ahead and click on collecting data on coaching. And of course, follow up with selecting apply. That will then bring up all of the topics that have been tagged with coaching and collecting data on coaching. So know that there's that. However, also there may be some resources that haven't been tagged correctly or haven't actually been tagged. So one way of searching things is on Google. If you search using site, S-I-T-E, colon, and then signetwork.org. Follow that up with a space. And in this case, I'm going to search coaching. That will bring up anything that's related to coaching on the website, whether it's been tagged as such or not. And so just one more way to make sure that you're searching anything related to the topic that you want that's in the SIG Network website. That will account for changes over the years and different website platforms so that you're able to access anything regardless of if they've been tagged correctly, or perhaps they live in a space on the website where maybe they aren't able to be tagged, which brings me to the national meetings. You can access that through events, click on national meetings. And through there, we've archived the most recent national meetings with the resources related to them. So if I click on the SPDIG national meeting, of course, most of you were able to attend and probably remember. This was our hub page that we used for our virtual layout or the virtual format of the national meeting. We've stripped away the login credentials for that and archived it so that you can still access the different pieces from that meeting that were able to be recorded or resources were shared. So for example, our keynote was Eliana Tardillo from West Ed. We've got the recording there for Eliana's keynote. If you scroll down lower, we've got poster sessions where people shared the posters that they shared during the meeting. If you click on this link, it'll take you to one page further that has any of the resources that people updated me with from their session details. Again, we have the forum presentations, similar sort of setup where you'll find presentation details and any of the resources that were shared to me from those breakouts archived. Again, this is public facing now. Anybody can access this. And then, of course, the closing keynote is Johanna Ward, and we've got the recording there from that. So before I move forward, let me go ahead and relinquish control of the microphone for just a moment and see if anybody's got questions about something that I may have covered. All right, whenever I ask a question like that, I draw on my experience as a teacher and remember that silence feels really good sometimes. So a lot of times it's hard for me to sit back and savor in quiet, but I didn't hear anything and I didn't see anything in the meeting chat. I do want to encourage people to, at any moment throughout today, to use the chat function, or when a question is asked, of course, it's always welcome to unmute your microphones and speak up vocally as well.
Well, I just have to say cheers to your work, John Lind. So way to go, way to go.
All right, thank you.
Look at Penny. Penny had a shout out too.
Well, thank you. That's nice to hear. I really enjoy the being part of the SIG network and leading it and working with so many, like I've said over and over, so many generous and thoughtful people who are committed to the same work that I'm in. Thank you for that recognition. I appreciate that. So we've looked at the SIG network, the national meeting, and various resources and ways we can access the resource library. So with that, people will remember during the national meeting that a lot of the work was on the dissemination plan. And during the meeting, it came to my attention that, hey, wait a minute, what is the end purpose of these dissemination plans? Is it to help OSEP with their stance? Is it to help projects with our stance? And the answer really is yes. It's all the way around. But ultimately, as Jennifer and I were talking and putting this together, going into the program area meeting, actually back in, I believe that was the end of July or beginning of August. Our thoughts and our talking was primarily around developing a way to disseminate your work, the outcomes of your work, and the strategies that are providing those outcomes to a broader community that can ultimately help your projects. When I think about that, I think about sustainability, really. In a perfect world, these projects would continue on through OSEP funding. However, as everybody in this call knows, the SPDIGs operate on a 5-year grant cycle. So at a minimum, funding will change after 5 years. Of course, now we're in a different world completely where funding is a little bit unknown. And so really important to be thinking about how can we get the work out into the hands of the people that need to use it, but also into the hands of decision makers who think about who should use it and how to fund using it. So with that, I want to introduce the Indiana SPDIG and specifically James Nelson and Penny Gregory, who have been willing to step forward and share the work that they've done on their dissemination plan and share their dissemination plan and where it stands currently. So with that, James and Penny, welcome.
Well, hello, everybody. I do need to clarify, and with apologies if I did not get it out correctly to you, John. It's Nelson's my middle name. It's James Nelson Robinson.
Oh, I knew that, James.
That's
I
okay.
apologize about that, and I'll make sure
No,
that
you know
gets
what?
changed where it's archived.
It's okay. It's all fun. And Nelson's kind of cool anyway. So um we'll be all right with that. But yeah, hi, it's good to meet all of you. I'm James. There's a section on your agenda about history, hero, heartbreak, and hope. Is that what you wanted me to do, John? Or
Yeah,
did you
that
want
would be great, James.
so quickly, just I've been here at the Indiana Center on Education with the now retired Dr. Cole for about 17 years, and I was um, a special ed teacher for several years prior to that here in Bloomington. Um, in terms of heroes, just because she's here, let's call Sandy Cole my hero. I mean, I got here because of her, and she's really set the tone for a lot of the work we've done here. So as we're celebrating her a little bit today, I'll go ahead and take credit for working for her for a while. I've learned more from her than I think anybody in my entire life, so that's great. Um, Heartbreak is literally just wondering. We all have the same heartbreak about the field of education right now. It's like, what happens when we have a federal law that guarantees access that is simply not heeded, that we basically have people telling us that we're just not going to do that. It's shocking to me after 50 years that that's where we are. Um, but I was in a classroom just this morning here in Bloomington, and there's a young special ed teacher who was doing co-teaching work in math, and she was energetic, she was hopeful, she clearly played an active role in designing the instruction. And was doing the kind of work that you want to see young people doing, and we need to see more young people. So, yeah, that's what gives me hope. I will defer to Dr. Gregory now.
Thank you, Dr. Robinson. Hello, everybody. I was nervous because he was saying James Nelson, and I said, I've been working now with Dr. Robinson for some months, and I didn't even know the man's name. So I'm happy that it was just a little bit of a mix-up because that was going to be weird after we hung up. So good. I'm Penny Gregory. I am sort of new to this community, and I feel like I want to almost say family. Because of my interactions with some of you all, it seems very much evident that there's been a lot of partnership and helpful relationships through the years. So I am the center director here at the Center on Education and Lifelong Learning, which is SAIL is the acronym. I hope you like James and our fancy new backgrounds. We just got these for you all because we wanted to be organized and professional. So, I hope you like it because James thought it was silly. So here we are. History, hero, heartbreak, and hope. My history is I always wanted to be a teacher. It was my lifelong dream. When I was 5 years old, I was on an Army base in Fort Campbell, Kentucky. I wanted to be a teacher, and that spiraled. Life takes you down a lot of twists and turns, and before you know it, I was a district administrator in special education, and now the director here at this center. So the hero, or I should say shero of my life, is my mother, Chung Suk Im, who is an immigrant to the country from South Korea, has been here as long as I've been alive, and is thriving and doing well in a country that was not originally her own. So I'm very proud of her, and she's a huge influence on who I am. Heartbreak, I think James said it best, a similar heartbreak. I think that when you're a teacher and you just have four walls and your children, if anybody's ever experienced that, it's like you have tunnel vision. You know exactly why you're doing the work you're doing. It's a beautiful day every day, even though it's rough and tough and heartbreaking and all that stuff, it's still beautiful. And it feels like we've gotten so far away from having that heart-centered conversation about what we're really supposed to be doing. It's almost like you've seen behind the veil, and it's not about the children, and you're just like, what? Education is not about the kids? How could this be? And so that's somewhat heartbreaking when you have to reintroduce the language about children in some of the conversations that you have, because it's so politicized now. But what gives me hope is also children. So I'm a mentor at the high school that my daughter goes to here in Bloomington, and just talking to those girls at the high school and their dreams, their vision of the future, their tenacity, their promise gives me a lot of hope. So even though times might feel bleak, watch out, be ready. We have generations coming behind us who are going to light this thing on fire. So I'm excited about that. John, can we go straight into our time now?
Yeah, I think that's great.
Okay, so I am new to this center as of June 1st and then physically here as of July 1st, which was the end part, the very last few months of this, the 5-year cycle of the last grant that we had for the center. And that's actually what we're going to be talking about today. So a lot of the conversation will be led by Dr. Robinson, and I will invite Dr. Cole, who sat in this seat before me for many years and founded actually this center. If you have any thoughts, or if we're, messing it up too bad, please just chime in if you will. But we just want to sort of talk to you about what we did, and it is not neat and with a bow tie on it, the dissemination workbook the way we would have liked it to be, because we just did not have this available to us when we were working on it. And I should say when they were working on it before I got here. We did, John announced our stake for this new grant cycle for the SPDIC. So we are definitely keeping this front of mind and using this tool now. But what we want to just talk about is sort of our road before. We were able to make some connections, but then also present some questions to you all, and maybe you can help us along with our thinking, maybe broaden our perspective on some things that that we've thought about along the way. So that's kind of what we're going to be doing today.
Can everybody see the what I'm sharing?
That looks great, James.
Okay,
Yes.
great. So yeah, we're one of we're based here at IU Bloomington. There's our beautiful sample gates down there. If you ever get a chance to come through, you absolutely have to go to our campus. We take a lot of pride in it. It's quite lovely down here, especially this time of year with the leaves changing. It's quite nice. But we're on the far northwest corner at the Indiana Institute on Disability, and like I said a minute ago, and Penny referred to, we've been here for close to 30 years doing different types of work. But our most recent SPDIG started in 2020 was named the Indiana Center on Teacher Quality, and a lot of it was based around retention for teachers in high need areas, specifically special education, and we were focused on rural implementation districts. And just quickly, the basic structure of the project was around supporting teacher acquisition of skills and implementation of universal design for learning and positive behavior interventions and supports, along with some licensure questions and looking at LRE. And so with our 7 districts, we went through some, years of training. The first couple of years were focused on developing a cadre of coaches in each district who could ultimately, as we're going to point to, sustain the work of those parallel paths of UDL and PBIS within their districts, while also looking at the active implementation frameworks from Implementation Science and the folks at NERN, for those of you familiar with them, to use those ongoing structures like district and building implementation teams, district capacity assessments, the implementation drivers, and those other pieces to create hopefully structures that would allow these, as John kind of alluded, to continue after we're gone, right? What does it look like for a district to say, hey, UDL is kind of our way of doing business. PBIS is how we look at classroom and building wide behavior and discipline. How do we continue to push this forward once James and Sandy and everybody else has gone down I-69 and we're no longer up in their districts? And so that was the core of that project across those 7 districts for the last 5 years. And as Penny alluded to, in terms of dissemination, the dissemination workbook, I think some of you might have been with us on some of the recent webinars and meetings that John's hosted, where we've talked about the dissemination workbook and how for us it's been a little bit of a newer thing, and we're really excited to apply it to the new SPDIG that we were fortunately awarded and hopefully actually funded. But we've kind of did some reverse engineering as we thought about that and looked at how some of the long-term outcomes and sustainability pieces really kind of map onto that. Penny, did you want to jump in, or Sandy, did you want to jump in?
No, I think you captured that great.
Great, James.
Any questions from anybody before I quickly roll on? And I'm not able to see the chat window, so if
Yeah,
somebody.
I'm checking it for you. You're
Okay,
good.
okay,
Yeah.
okay, thank you. So one of the core elements of this, as I said, were these 7 districts, but really thinking about stakeholder ID and analysis was going to be core for us. I mean, as you saw, the name of the project, the name of the SPDIG was Indiana Center on Teacher Quality, and we really looked at teachers first and foremost as the primary folks who are going to be furthering the project once it's done, right? Each district has a cadre of coaches now who are trained not just in UDL or PBIS, but also in professional development, in effective communication skills, and a number of different pieces. And their job ultimately then is to connect with those other stakeholders, administrators, special education personnel, students, certainly. We also had a really robust family engagement component using the dual capacity family engagement framework. And so in dissemination terms, it was kind of for us, what did we want people to think, feel, and be able to do? And partly, for especially in terms of PBIS and UDL, what we really like, the thinking we want, the kind of the DNA that we wanted to bond to their skeletons was that you are a PBIS district, you are a UDL district. This is just how we do business, right? And from obviously the practices in the classrooms, but even things like when it comes time to buy new furniture, is UDL at the front end of your thinking? Right? When you're looking at the procedures for kids to go through the cafeteria line, is UDL like just baked into the way you think, right? And to that end, we needed folks to be able, we were looking for especially those coaches, to feel like they could be champions in active implementation frameworks and the implementation science literature. That role of champion is really critical to making sure there's somebody on the ground in each building who feels sort of a sense of brand identity, that this is who I am, and I'm the one who isn't necessarily the make or break about whether this happens, but I'm the shepherd to help align those resources to make sure that anything we're going to do in terms of state sustainability still happens. And in most of our districts, we have 2 or 3 people in each building who we can describe as champions. One of our colleagues who's not on this call with us, Dr. Lucy Fishman, she and I are trying to finish up we did some qualitative research with several participants across the grant, specifically looking at this question of that role as champion, and how did they, because many of them were shifting from being a family consumer science teacher or an English teacher to adopting this role as a champion and coach. And so we're looking forward eventually to getting hopefully publishing the outcome of that work, because it was pretty, the results are pretty exciting just in terms of hearing those stories and capturing those narratives. And then ultimately, like what we want is we want those coaches in particular to be able to shift their mindsets and practices, not just in terms of UDL or whatever, but also as champions for that work, and be able to, essentially run things like building implementation teams, etc. And some of the early results some of the results near the end of the grant were actually kind of nice. We were able to see that the evidence-based practices around UDL and PBIS, the district capacity assessment that we measured yearly went across the districts, went from 38 to 91%. In other words, these districts we left those districts, with an A-, feeling like, hey, we can take these 2 practices and we have the ability to do these things, which you want to see that. It's, when we first did this in the first year, and the districts would see that they're at 38% or lower in some cases, because it's an average, they were like, especially the superintendents and special ed directors are wringing their hands, like, tugging at their collars, like, that's a really low number. Are we okay with that? But in fact, no, it's what you expect, is that once you learn both in terms of the practices of UDL or PBIS, but also the structures of implementation science, and the implementation drivers and that sort of things, of course you're going to be low at that, but you'll build that skill so that we can leave you in a place where you can you have the capacity to keep going. And alongside that, all the districts were trending upward in their LRE. They were all at least meeting their the state target in Indiana. We had over 375 folks in our who went through our training and coaching, and the satisfaction data was really good. Which we can at least infer that leads to a sense of self-efficacy in terms of pushing this along. So in terms of like how sustainable, a lot of what I described was relational, right? So I'm kind of curious whether in the chat or just out loud, if anybody has thoughts around how the sustainability plans that you guys have used in your projects, what a relationality, if that's even a word, I think I might just be making up words. How do relationships play out for you guys? Bueller?
Well, in our SPDIG in Colorado, we have a regional model. So we're piloting 3 regions, and then our centers around 2 are centered around a BOCES, and the other one is centered around Adams State University. And so what's great is that we're implementing MTSS, and we're building the capacity of the regions with their relationships, not only within their organization through the BOCES or through the university, but also building those relationships out into the district. And we feel like that's what's going to continue this long after the SPDIG is gone. So, and we're small, rural, isolated, and it's all about relationships here.
Yeah, excuse me, I swallowed water the wrong way. That's kind of been a hallmark of the way we've approached things across, even on previous SPDIGs, is that we can't just be another university crew coming in with our suits and hope that they'll just take whatever we give them and run with it. We've got to get our hands dirty a little bit and connect with folks.
Yeah, and we're doing it within regional implementation teams. So we're only building the capacity of the teams, taking the regional capacity assessment, using those tools, and building from there. I see Kristen has unmuted. Maybe that's my boss. Maybe she wants to talk.
I'm just adding what BOCES stands for. It stands for Board of Cooperative Education Services. So in California, that would be your SELPA. So your special education organization. I was helping out my friend.
Thank you.
Teamwork makes the dream work, right? Anybody else?
I'd be interested also in this next part, Dr. Robinson, in what ways is stakeholder engagement relational? I've been a part of a lot of teams, and when we think about stakeholders, lots of times it's a list of people, right? Who do you want at the table? We've never really started with how do we immediately think about this in a relational way, and I'm just wondering, have people started with that question? And if you didn't start with that question, if you did, I'd like to hear that. But even if you didn't, did you get around to thinking about it that way? I know most of us in education, even for a little while, you recognize very early on that, you get things done at the speed of trust and relationships. But is there a part that would be worth highlighting right here that someone would like to share?
This is Paula Crawford. I was formerly the project director in North Carolina for around 10 years, and I'm now a part of an evaluation team for another state. I can say, speaking to that, when we considered who we wanted to be a part of our groups such as that, we wanted to have a variety of voices. So even those individuals, and often these folks were EC directors across the state. So we, at one time in our project, we had 94 different districts that were a part of the partnership. And we always looked at having the voices that would represent folks who really could challenge us and think about things in a different way, not just people who agreed with what we were doing, but those who were not afraid to speak up and say, have you ever thought about doing it this way? And have you considered this need and so forth? So I think that's important as well.
You know, it's been interesting in this project where we implementation science, the exploration stage, really requires a degree of stakeholder involvement. At the same time, it's tricky sometimes because our selection process for districts in some ways makes it hard to get every voice into the mix. And I'm curious, like, you know, if there's a if we have a lesson learned, for me, it's like, boy, at that front end, when we're trying to select districts and select schools to participate with us, how do you get a student voice in at that point in the game? How do you even get parent or teacher voices in at that point in the game? That's always a hard one because, the people who are making the decisions about whether to even apply for a grant like this from the district level they're in principals chairs or more likely in superintendent or central office chairs, right?
James, I'm going to piggyback just a little bit on what you
Sure.
said, and also what Paula said. I think the relational piece is two-way. And so at the beginning of any grant, at least has been my experience, the people applying for the grant have to trust the people that have the grant. And that starts with relations across the state. And they may not know who SEL was or is. Many did, but if they didn't, people talk. And so I think that the establishing across the state, across the many stakeholders in the state, in all levels of the education profession, superintendents, principals, teacher association, parent organizations, to understand and help them know that they can trust us and that we intend to be relational. We aren't going in to fix, we are going in to work with them. And so I think the relational piece is kind of two-way and kind of starts with that trust.
All right, I'm gonna keep us moving because at some point the star of the show gets to do her bit, and we'll do that. So why am I not clicking the way I want to click? Okay, hold on. I will get us where we need to go. Okay, so one of the other bits was specifically in terms of what we consider to be part of the dissemination process is really the scaling question. And for the last one, the scaling was internal to each district initially, which was the districts would have actionable sustainability plans that, again, those champions, especially those building level teacher coaches, would be able to both have the skills and positionality to do that, but also have resources to continue to do that. And to be 100% honest, some of our districts are really still rolling with this. We keep in touch with them. They're checking in with us about, resources that we could support them with. We have had some districts that their action plans or sustainability plans were not as actionable or likely to continue that. The other part that we're looking to do, and we're trying to get some more support for, is a UDL alliance at the statewide level, where districts who have either been part of this or districts who haven't been would be able to be part of a network of schools or districts who are using UDL or PBIS in Indiana, and so that they can learn both in terms of the actual process of UDL or PBIS within their schools or districts, but also just learn about implementation questions and sustainability questions. And we've had some initial interest. It's a rough time to get districts to jump into many new things because in case you guys didn't know, that funding's not always solid. There are little question marks here and there. So the scaling piece has been important to us in terms of just making sure the individual districts have really clear action plans. Sandy, in a second, if she chooses, can weigh in on a little bit of like any specifics around or examples that she wants to share. But one thing that was really nice was the core, or I guess the foundation of the work, the thing on which UDL and PBIS rested was the active implementation frameworks. And it was uncomfortable for a lot of administrators when we first started because this was very new to them. And we saw over the course of a great deal of growth in their sense of self-efficacy in using AIF to drive what they were doing. And you see some of the quotes about they began to understand their teacher roles, because again, a lot of these administrative folks are used to kind of just making decisions, but to hear them say that actually it was empowering to them, knowing that by giving and ceding some of that territory to these teacher coaches made a huge difference for them. And to be able to see how implementation drivers played a big role. And one of our lessons learned in the second year of this work was that, we're actually going to need to do a specific training for our coaches around implementation science, which we hadn't originally planned to do. It was built in for the administrators in the districts, but it was really clear, like, if we want those guys to be champions, they not only need to know the specifics around UDO and PBIS and coaching, professional development, and all those pieces, excuse me, but they're going to really need to know, like, what is this background architecture around how an initiative is selected and sustained. And I think these data help kind of illustrate that the administrators in these districts began to see those dispositions and skills surface among their teacher coaches. And that was really encouraging for us to see that. So one last question then, and Sandy, feel free to jump in anywhere you want. Have you guys, what does implementation science and active implementation frameworks look like in the projects you've used, and or have you seen barriers to using a framework like that in the projects that you've done? Bueller? Sometimes that joke's funny.
Well,
Kristen and Veronica, I know I'm going to have to like shout you out because I know Colorado is an active implementation state. And so I'm shouting at you.
Go ahead, Kristen.
I don't know where to start except that it's our everything. It's our North Star. And we're having a meeting with our grantees to talk about our implementation guides, because we've created region, district, and school. And we are talking about revamping our school fidelity tool to reflect what you should accomplish during your implementation stages and giving you the flexibility to move back and forth throughout that. So it is our North Star. It is our work, and it is, as you guys know, it's challenging. But I think we're in the 5th year of our grant, going into the 5th year, and we've made great strides because that we've used the capacity assessments, because even with our regional model, Sandy, you and your work with Karen Ward championed us in Colorado to work on pilots, and we have the most bang for our buck with working with regions, because there's not only outreach to the districts that get our grant, but the districts within that region, and then community partners have stepped up and talking about times of trouble. These community partners, just hearing today, Veronica, in your area, how food shortages that they're showing up and having those discussions, because those are those kinds of concerns are on superintendents' minds. I don't know if I got it right, but I'll toss it to you, Veronica.
No, you got it exactly right. And I think one thing that, and I can no longer say I'm new in this role. This is my 4th year. I like to say that I'm new, but it's pretty new in the education, right? But so I was a teacher for 20 years. And so in a small rural where I also worked at the systems level and helped support implementation teams of PBIS and MTSS, and then got blessed to help my friends and neighbors in the San Luis Valley. And one thing that I feel like implementation science does and helps those of us who are classroom teachers, who are part of these systems-wide teams. You know, I'm a classroom teacher in a small rural district, but I'm also on the leadership team, making big decisions for my districts and for my students and for my child that goes to school. And implementation science and how we align it through the implementation guides really lightens that cognitive load for implementers to say, oh, this is next. Oh, thank goodness. Oh, because I didn't know this was next. So it really is that guide that really helps the work move forward, because without it, we could abandon the work because it's ambiguous and it's hard. And we just don't have the time to think about what the next step is. So I think having implementation science and having the guides to show us what is next through the stages, and then also within our office, we found it very helpful that many of us are taking the implementation micro-credential, and that has really changed the game too, because now we can really talk as a team about, we have the school fidelity tool that really should be going through the stages of implementation so that it is doable, right? And we're able to do it in small systems where you have a K-12 with 80 students. You know, in the school, the superintendent's the bus driver and runs the cafeteria duty and does everything else, you know. So it's really helpful to have those as guides.
I think Tom has something to say, Sandy.
Go, Tom.
Sure. So I was just listening, and in Minnesota, we use the active implementation frameworks as well for our SPDG implementing check and connect. And like in all ways, you know, DCA, RCA, linked teams model, tracking the stages of implementation at every level. So I was just listening to and just had to quip, I hear the vertical slice. So you have someone who is familiar both with the ground level work, also involved with different levels of decision making and assessment of implementation progress, and that's in that linked teams model. If you've seen it, there's so many things that you could just see a flash of and you know what it is, and you know you see the blue rectangles, right, and they're arranged sort of diagonally in the active implementation framework. So I heard it in there. Sounds good. Speaking my language. Thank you.
And Tom, Minnesota has
Yeah.
been at it a long time with implementation science. A
Yeah,
lot.
that's right.
I think you were like one of the first active implementation states.
Could be. Yeah, I'm
think
not sure, but we've been doing it for a while. Yeah.
All right, I know that we were slotted in for 20-ish minutes, and I feel like we're coming to the end of that. So I'm gonna move us along. And just if you guys are interested in finding out where we are, we've decided to be a little more social media friendly recently, so that's where you can find us. Then there's our regular old-fashioned webpage as well. But yeah, thanks for listening to us again. Penny and I are, Dr. Gregory and I are at the front end of being more involved on this side of things. Dr. Gregory, because she's new to our center, me because I always had Sandy to hold my hand during all this stuff. So to that end, I'm going to go ahead and pass it back to John, who I think is going to then let Sandy share sort of a longer term view of what is SPDIG looked like in Indiana over the course of the years. Unless, Dr. Gregory, if you have any last comments.
No, appreciate everybody participating with us and kind of giving, your examples. What I really love about this is that we're just learning from each other. And so, we're beginning very early. We just got this new grant. So a lot of what you said is resonating with me and kind of storing it in the back of my brain to say, okay, this is what we need to be thinking about. So really appreciate the discussion and thank you for leading that, Dr. Robinson.
Well, thank you both for your pieces. And James, I apologize about slipping up on your last name. I hope that people can see here that it's been changed, updated, of course, to James Robinson. Thank you for calling me on that. I appreciate
Oh,
it.
no, that's totally, listen, I should have such large problems in my life.
Well, thank you both for your input, thoughts, and care you've put into the dissemination plan in Indiana SPDIGs, carrying the torch forward and making sure that the work continues to hit the efforts that you're putting out. So with that, we've talked a little bit about this idea that Sandy Cole is going to step out and tell us what her lessons have been learned through 15 years of SPDIG funding. And of course, this is a little bit of a continuation of our closing keynote at the national meeting, in which we got a good view from Johanna Ward's experience with her time working with the SPDIGs and moving forward with her retirement. So Sandy, I really appreciate your stepping forward and taking the time to put together these ideas of your lessons learned through your time with the SPDIGs and sharing that with the broader group. So with that, welcome, Sandy.
Thank you, John. It's great to see friendly faces on the screen. Always fun to see all of you. So I'll start with my history, and I'll make it quick. I've been at this a long time, so like 50 plus years. I've been an elementary administrator, secondary administrator, special ed teacher, and I came to IU about 28, 29 years ago to start the Center on Education Lifelong Learning, which was and continues to be the best job I've ever had. And in that period of time, I also directed the Special Education Leadership Program through the School of Ed at IU, which licenses directors in the state for special education. So that's my history. My hero, this is going to sound strange, but Eleanor Roosevelt is my hero. And she's my hero for a whole lot of reasons, and I could take up the whole time explaining to you why, but I think about her time. I think about, where women's place was supposed to be, which she never really accepted, her social justice issues, what she did for women. So I could go on, but she's definitely one of my heroes. My heartbreak, I'll just ditto what Penny and James said. And think we all can express the same kind of heartbreak. And then my hope. So my hope's probably a little bit different in that I was diagnosed with cancer in December of 2024, just got done with chemo. So my hope is kind of it's a self-centered hope, I guess you could say. But my hope is that I'm around, long enough to see the end of this craziness with our government. And I hope I'm around long enough to see my grandkids experience, and really be able to interact with social justice issues in ways that that we all should. So that's my hope. So I will share my slides. Now, you may see some redundancy here because, Penny and James and I probably still think a lot of alike. So, but I want to share with you kind of lessons learned after 15 years of directing SPDIGs, and just give some insights into my time in that seat in my time at the center. And then I'll end with a couple of just, human elements in terms of how this felt over all this time. So we've talked about implementation science, and I'm going to just talk a little bit more about it because, and I think, Kristen, you said, it's your everything, it's what you do, and we think about it as the umbrella for every initiative, every district, every region. This is really what should be your guiding framework. And I thank Dean Fix and Karen Ward and the SysUp team here because many of you who have been working with implementation science can relate. When I first met Dean Fixon and Karen Ward, because I was an external evaluator on the SysUp project many years ago, like when this first rolled out, I remember walking out of that meeting and thinking, holy crap, I feel like I just walked into a foreign language and I'll never be able to learn that foreign language. I was like, I don't know if I'll ever get it. So, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute, but I thank these people that really worked with me in terms of my evaluation of their project and, helped me understand what it really meant. And it is absolutely the guiding framework for us. Process data is as important as outcome data. So I remember there was a time in my life when I felt like outcome data was like the be all, right? And part of that's because of the climate we're in education, because we get hounded with outcome data. Give us your outcome data. Give us your outcome data. But I remember listening to Dean and Karen early on about this process data piece, which is, the big fidelity word. Like, how well are you implementing? How does that process data really look? And the other part of that, and James alluded to this a little bit, process data also means telling the stories and getting the qualitative data, talking to the people. Is the process working? The second thing that I've learned is the importance of the teams. And the teams are the core of the PDSA cycle. We found, and a lesson learned over the time we've used implementation science, is that many districts have their own team structures. Buildings have their own team structures. And so changing those existing team structures proved challenging in some ways. They already had, a core team. They already had a school improvement team. They already had this team. They had this team. And so helping them rethink team structures was really part of the task. We also learned, and this was an error we made, not so much in our last 5 years, but in the 5 years that preceded it, we ignored building implementation teams. And you can't do it. If you are working in a district, and if you're working in districts, the building implementation team is critical. And if it's not in place, if it's not functioning well, if it's not meeting, if it's not being led by the principal, then it halts the whole PDSA cycle, first of all, and it really halts that feedback loop because you're not getting anything coming up from the building to the district team. So I think in this second grant, or this last grant that James and Penny talked about, we did a much better job with this. But it's a challenge. And it's a challenge because people don't have time. They already have other meeting structures that they're trying to, figure out and integrate. And so I think finding time for building implementation teams to meet was one of our biggest challenges. And yet we hammered them because we knew how important it was. And we also knew from our previous grant that it was a real error on our part to not insist that those happen. We didn't learn this until last grant, but every grant's a new grant and we learn a lot. And the one thing we learned was, the APR is great. And you sit down and you put, the things in the APR that you want to have in that APR. But how does that get translated to the districts? And how do they know what that data is and how it's going to be collected? So in this last grant, we created formal data collection plans. And in fact, it was a part of our MOUs with the district. And those data plans, we then, and we had a wonderful person, Dr. Lucy Fishman, who kind of drove that and kept us really honest with this. But those formal data collection plans, we went to the district teams and said, it's time for this. It's time for this. Oh, now we're going to do the DCA. Oh, now we're going to collect the efficacy information and data. That was important because it brought clarity, first of all, to the districts, but it also kept us accountable. And so I think that communication was really an important lesson for us. James, feel free to jump in if you have comments on any of these. All right, I've talked a little bit about this in terms of my walking away from my first meeting with Dean and Karen. But wow, those of you who are working with implementation science know that it requires a fluency. And that fluency isn't always easy to learn. But it's important. It's important to help your districts and your participants and stakeholders understand it. I think that in the very first grant that we used implementation science with, we weren't very fluent. So it was really hard to help our grantees to be fluent. We got better. And as we got better, I think what we did, and I've talked a lot with Karen about this, we made it a little more friendly. I put that in quotes. But we tried really hard to say, all right, we're going to use the drivers, but let's look at the drivers. Let's look at these drivers in ways that you already have some of these things in place. You're already using some of these drivers. Let's help you understand how these drivers connect to the work we're doing. And so really making it more applicable instead of throwing out the language, I think was really important. But Kristen said it well, it's hard. It's hard to help folks who have never used implementation science, they've never heard about implementation science, and they really are very used to skipping the exploration installation stage and get right to doing it. It's very hard to help them think differently about change and about a structure for change. So I think we've gotten better with this, but I will say in the first grant that we used implementation science, we didn't do it very well. Using valid implementation tools is important. You all know this. The one thing we struggled with was UDL does not have a really good implementation tool. And we've chatted a little with CAST about this. I don't think they still have a very valid implementation tool. We have used an adapted one that a district in Indiana has used in the past. But other than that, all of our implementation tools were valid and we used those. The other thing we did in addition to a formal data collection plan was to have a clear communication plan in place. Now, communications are a part of implementation science, and but it's often not one of those things that gets highlighted often when you think about implementation science. And so we learned early on in the very early stages of working with a district that we wanted to know how they were going to communicate this work to the community, to their other stakeholders. What did that look like? What were the actions? How were they going to do it? When were they going to do it? Who was going to do it? And that communication plan, again, was reviewed very frequently in the district team meetings. And what we found was that our districts got pretty creative in how they rolled things out. But it's my belief, and one of the lessons that I learned was that if you don't have that plan in place, it's kind of ad hoc. And so what gets messaged to the community about this work, what gets messaged to the school board about this work, sometimes isn't always clear. And sometimes isn't really the message that you hope the district is sharing with their stakeholders. So we learned that early on, we had districts work on a communication plan, and that plan got revised and edited and changed pretty frequently. Oh, wow. Be aware of the enabling context of districts. James and I are working in New Mexico with a district where this has become important. And we learned this as well in the last 5 years of this current grant. Sometimes frameworks can be restrictive. Sometimes frameworks aren't very flexible. And yet you want the framework to be implemented with fidelity. And so there is this constant push and pull, I think, with how do you work with the enabling context of a district and still be true to the framework that you're trying to implement in that district. We have found that up front, we had to learn a lot about the district. Now, we're in Indiana, right? So, and Indiana is, you know, as are many states, very diverse in terms of the cultures and the rural and the urban, and there are a variety of ways that folks do things, and we're a very local control state, so districts have a lot of autonomy to do their own thing. And so understanding their context, understanding how we were going to work within that context, forced us to be flexible. And we weren't at first. I think in our previous grant, we weren't always that flexible. And so I think, especially with implementation science, which sometimes can feel, I don't want to say restricted, but like a plan is in place and we have to do it this way. We found that it's okay to do some flexing, to do some changing around in terms of who's on what team, and there are some non-negotiables with implementation science, but we also really felt enabling context had to be understood. We worked with, in the 7 districts, a really, really small rural school. James, what was the population of Monroe Central?
Monroe Central, I don't know the actual population, but they had an elementary, and then across the parking lot was a junior, senior high school. They graduated maybe 70 kids a year.
Right. And, their favorite day was when students drove tractors to school. So, and so that was a district all the way to a much larger district with Vincennes that had multiple elementaries and high schools. So, the context of those 2 districts and across all of our districts was very different. So how do you work with that? How do you work with the leadership in those districts? That's the enabling context piece. And then I've mentioned this a little bit in terms of just balancing the fidelity of implementation with district autonomy. And I think we learned that over time. We learned how to do that, again, back to the enabling context of districts. And then finally, coaching should be frequent and build on skills from training sessions. We also learned early on that we were doing training for 5 sessions and then coaching. And we learned from our stakeholders and our teachers, hey, that's not helping us. Let's train and coach, train and coach, train and coach, train a skill, coach a skill, train a skill, coach a skill. So we learned that in this last grant. We've already talked about this, so I can skip through this, but if anyone else has a comment that they want to put in the chat about using implementation science and what the benefits have been, especially the benefits, I'm going to take a second and just stop and feel free to chat or put your thoughts in the chat. I think we pretty well covered this with James's question. Okay. Let's talk sustainability.
Randy, you have a benefit in the chat.
Oh, okay.
It says folks are going slow and being more intentional about selection, from Veronica.
Oh, yeah. Veronica, can I call on you to say just a little bit more?
Well, that's just one benefit. Sure, yeah. Thank you, Sandy. And I really appreciate this meeting is awesome. So thank you, all of our presenters. The the whole exploration installation stage thing is very foreign to a lot of people who just want to get a great practice out to their
Yep.
kids. I mean, they just like, I heard this works, so let's do it, you know, and really taking the time to chat about it with more than just the leadership, right? Using your implementation team to have that conversation and going through a process. And we're learning that the Hexagon tool, which is a great tool, adds a heavy process. And
Yes.
so, I mean, so we're looking at not only continuing with the Hexagon tool, but also what are some alternative other selection processes that we could use as well that are not so heavy, especially in stretch systems. But yeah, our motto is going slow to go far, going slow
Yep.
to go fast, and I feel like people are finding more benefit from that.
I agree, Veronica. And I think too, because I know Colorado is doing this, it's interesting the shift that has to take place because districts are used to getting the latest shiny object, right? And going for it. And they go all in and they start with initial implementation and they're going to do it this way and they're going to get it to the kids fast.
Right.
And and I think that's really the hardest thing to help districts to stop, go slow, be intentional, and understand that in the end, they'll be in a better place.
100%. And yes, and that going back to that communication piece, communicating that to boards of education.
Yeah.
And finding ways to do that. And with respectful dialogue and being able to have those conversations, which can be very challenging because the board is saying, hey, we need help right now.
Right, right. Our scores are bad. Would you just make them
exactly.
work better? Yeah.
Exactly. You know, so yes, well, thank you.
Yeah. So this is one of the things we found with sustainability. James alluded to this a little bit, but we found that somehow districts have to commit to having dedicated full-time coaches. Now, that may be realigning some of the coaching roles that they already have in place. It may be that they have to hire new people. It may be that they repurpose people. But the point here is that it's really difficult for a teacher who teaches all day to be expected to also be a trainer and coach in a building. And so we've worked hard with our districts to try to say, not only should they have some time, but they need to be paid as well. So we were really fortunate with some of our superintendents who actually contractually put this into their contracts so that the coaches could get paid and that they would have time. Now, was it always perfect? No. And that's when the enabling context comes in and trying to understand that, there are some districts that just don't have the resources for that. But then you have to be really creative to think about what are other ways that we can get dedicated coaching time for some of our folks.
Can I jump in on that, Sandy?
Yeah, please.
So, and we've had some other projects where that's been a thing is a stipended coach who gets half day or full day for that work. And another thing that has to be considered on that is really clear expectations for that role, not just for the people who are in that role, but so that everybody else knows that. Because we have, in fact, my dissertation found this in a completely different project, which is that colleagues and coworkers of somebody who is in a teacher role, but then steps out for half of their day can create some weird politics in their building if it's not really clear what that job is, what those roles are, that they're not in an evaluational role. There's just a lot of little bits that can come into that in terms of making sure that those roles are sustainable, and that again that champion position is something that those teachers can embrace without feeling that external pressure from their colleagues.
I'm going to move rather quickly through some of this because I'm watching my time. This is a big one. We didn't do this well the first time we implemented implementation science in a grant, but you got to pay attention to the competing priorities in the district. We have used the initiative inventory with our districts. That's been helpful, but just you got to hold them to the fire because if it's not a priority, it's not going to happen. And if there's a lot of competition for resources and time and energy, it's also not going to happen. So, and this gets to the selection of our districts, to be honest with you, because we asked for commitment around this being a district priority. This is a no-brainer. Ensure resources are there. Superintendent's role was critical. We learned this from a previous grant. We insisted on it in this grant, and it made all the difference in the world. The superintendent has to be at the table. Superintendent has to commit as a priority, and the superintendent has to be at the district leadership team meetings. If you don't have an executive level leader at that table during the district team, nothing happens because no one else can allocate resources. And so it just bogs everything down. Likewise, you all know how important principals are. We did not have the luxury that some of you have. Well, I'm going to get to the state director in a minute because she's amazing, but our state initiatives just have been kind of all over the place in Indiana with not a lot of alignment. And so we had to kind of skip the state implementation team piece, which is a part of implementation science. It's been problematic. We've made it work because we have a great state director, but I would say this is a lesson learned that if it's possible to really align with state initiatives so that you have that alignment from state, region, district, and classroom. We did a culminating conference. We learned you don't do that at the end of the grant. You do that like in year 4, because at the end of the grant, it was just better to do it when we had a lot of folks that could participate and who also weren't, ending the grant. Don't rely on a single individual to carry the initiative, but implementation science won't allow that. That's the really cool thing about implementation science, because it builds capacity across lots of roles and responsibilities. We had turnover. We had superintendents leave. We had principals leave, as many of you do. We've had shifts in our state government. We went from an elected state superintendent of education to an appointed state superintendent. So we've had lots of movement, but we found that when you build the capacity that implementation science framework and their teams allow, that it works, and you can really make sure the capacity and sustainability continue. Skipping this because we've talked a little bit about that. Other fun facts. We were awarded a subcontract from our Department of Ed. So we hold the full contract for the SPDIG. What I would say is an advantage with that is that it diminished the need for our Department of Ed to realign their staff or even hire new staff. And they were really short anyway. And so by giving us the contract to do the work and the implementation while they oversaw budgets and other pieces of the grant, made a real difference, I think, in terms of getting things done. And we weren't, IU is a bureaucracy, but it's not the same bureaucracy as a Department of Ed. And so I think there was also a little more flexibility in terms of what we could do by having that subcontract from the state to do the work. It also, and I think that Nancy Holsapple, our state director, would agree with this, it brought a different level of trust with the districts. And so instead of, the state coming in to do X, Y, and Z, which in our state is not always viewed positively, it moved that aside, and it just brought a level of trust with the districts that I think was really important. We have a wonderful involved state director. Nancy Holsapple is our state director. She's been project director on all of these SPDIGs. She's amazing. And so we are fortunate. In fact, I said to her, okay, Nance, if you retire before I retire, because I wasn't sure we could get the SPDIG through the Indiana Department of Ed without her there, then, you can't retire before I retire because we got to write this new SPDIG, and she's hanging on. Make sure that project staff have clear and defined roles. I think we did this pretty well. We had project coordinators on our team a lot, and they had very specific tasks. We were fortunate. Well, I think yeah. We were fortunate because, and I guess this would be one of my recommendations for new directors or new states involved. We were able over 15 years to continue the alignment of the content from one grant to another. Now, you all know when that RFP comes out and you look at it and you go, oh my gosh, how am I going to, push this into this box and push this into this round hole? And how am I going to do all these things they're asking us to do? And so we sat back after our very first grant and we said, what things can we learn from this grant? What things are we doing really well? How can we continue to do those within the framework of this new RFP? And I think one of the things that has benefited us the most is that it means that I kept staff through 3 different SPDIGs. They were there for all 3. They had the content. I didn't have to hire new people to get, really fluent with something new and different. So in all 3 of our grants, we've had PBIS, UDL, and the last 2 implementation science. And always moving the family engagement piece in there. And so I'm not, don't misquote me. I'm not saying defy the RFP and do what you want, but I am saying that you can really look at an RFP and you can meet the requirements of that by still sitting back and saying, what do we do well? What is our capacity? And how do we learn and build on what we did before? And I think that was something that helped us tremendously. Play and celebrate. James will tell you we did a lot of this because there were just some days that you got to celebrate and you got to play. But I would just say you got to play and celebrate like just a little small things. And food's always great. And finally, these are my final thoughts. It's really okay not to know. So I remember the first day I met John. I remember my first day at a OSEP national meeting, and I knew nobody. And I was as foreign to the federal, lingo and language as anyone could be. I'd come out of public schools. What's this grant? And then, of course, you write a grant and then you say, oh shit, now we got to do it. So I was at that point too, right? So it's really okay not to know. And I didn't know anything in my first few years as a SPDIG director. And I just say that honestly because it was a huge learning curve. But it's okay. It's really okay not to know. And here's why. I'm going to go down here. Oh. Form connections. Because that's why it's okay not to know, because somebody else will know. And you'll have a colleague, in this network that's on screen here to discuss your work, and you end up with lifelong friends. There are people on here that, I've talked about my cancer journey with, and, we love seeing each other. And so it's, this is a network that you need to hang on to, and you need to really celebrate and take advantage of, because it is okay not to know. I still think I'm not sure I know. So it's okay not to know. Hire the right people. James has been with me forever. My team's been with me forever. And then, when I leave, we hire the amazing Dr. Penny Gregory. And so people are in the right place, doing the right thing, a really critical piece. Patience, flexibility, adaptability. Gosh, James knows how many times, we would get really frustrated with a district, or we would feel like they weren't doing what we wanted them to do. But then I think we always sat back and said, because you can't forget what it's like to be in their role. And, we don't sit in an ivory tower at SEL. We never have. And so it was important to reflect and sit back and remember our own days in the classroom, our own days as administrators in buildings, and remember that this is tough work. And maybe we need to just be really patient and flexible with folks. It didn't mean that we sacrificed, you know, the fidelity of the work. It didn't mean that, you know, we got angry, but it meant that we were much more, I think, compassionate because we understood where those folks were coming from. Take advantage of the Signet work tools that John has talked about and the connections there. Celebrate the little things. Form a partnership with those federal officers. You know, they're a part of your team. I thank Tara, Anita, and Jennifer. So here's another little aside. I came out of public schools, and if you said federal officer to me when I was in public schools, it was like, oh man, I don't want a federal officer in my building. So again, one of my learnings was, gosh, these people are here to help. You know, they're here to help us get through this grant, and they were always a part of the team. Take advantage of them. We've talked about relationships. It's important. You know, our districts were all over the state. Did I like driving to all these places and sitting down at a table with the superintendent? Not always. Especially when there wasn't a good place to eat or a good place to stay in the particular area. But that's what I think has helped us most, is that our districts understood that we cared, and the relationships have been really a critical element of this work. Shared leadership. I've talked about James and Lucy. I couldn't have done it without them. There is, you know, there is a calm that comes when you know you don't have to do it all. And there's a calm that comes when you're sharing the leadership with other amazing leaders who could have sat in my chair any day of the year. So shared leadership works. It's been my motto forever. And that and hiring the right people, you can't go wrong. I'm going to pull from Jennifer Coffey, who is huge on telling stories. And I would say, tell your story. Again, I think all of us on this screen who direct these projects, if we had time, we could write an incredible book on the stories of our time with SPDIGs. And it'd probably be a bestseller because the stories are funny. The stories are, you know, they're passionate. They are huge success stories. Some of them are just things to celebrate. And wouldn't it be great, John, this is your new task, to bring all the stories from these project directors together and put them in one book, because, you know, we can give data to the feds and we can give lots of APR information to the feds, and that's important. But I will tell you that when people hear your stories, it resonates, and people will understand the importance of this work because of those stories. So that's your new task, John, or not. And then finally, take care of yourself. It's easy to put in long days, but it's not smart to put in long days. I've learned this. I didn't learn this well in the beginning, but I wish someone would have taken me aside and told me this early on. Because when the cancer hit, you suddenly realize that there's, you know, a lot of the things that you always worried about don't really matter. And that taking care of yourself is just a huge piece of being able to lead, and a huge piece of being able to be a part of this community that we're a part of. So take care of yourself. Got some collection tools on here, and that's it. Unless you have questions.
Well, Sandy, that's not just it. That's a lot. That was a lot to digest, and really some golden nuggets throughout that. I mean, that was just a gem of a presentation of what you've learned, and you know, the lessons that you took to heart, and it really is meaningful, I'm sure, to everybody in the audience. I mean, I'm not a great note taker, but I've got a lot of notes that I just wrote down throughout your whole presentation there, and I will take to heart compiling the stories. That's not a small task.
No.
But boy, do I hear the importance of it. You know, the other thing I really took from that is that it's okay not to know. And I really appreciate that. What I was thinking about as you said that is I fully agree with that. But what's important to follow up with is it's not okay not to want to know.
Yeah,
Right? It's
absolutely.
okay not to know, but I think it's important to follow up with a desire to like, let's find out. So, and you know, the other thing I was thinking about as you were talking is the importance of culture. You talked about hiring the right people. I think hiring the right people helps create a culture.
Mhm.
But obviously, this idea of it's okay not to know from a director also supports the right culture. So I really appreciate the time you took to bring this to the group. I appreciate the time you put towards the SPDIGs and the clear effort that you put in creating a culture that's going to live on not just through the SPDIGs that you were part of, but the team that you set up for success moving forward also. So
Thanks,
again,
John.
thank you. Thank you, James Robinson. Thank you, Penny, as well, for your time. And so everybody knows this was recorded. We'll get the PowerPoints up as well, so that'll be archived. And again, thank you, Sandy.
Thank you, everybody. I'll miss seeing y'all. Bye.
Bye.